The news arrived like a sudden winter frost. It settled upon the small, usually bustling town of Oakhaven. John Smith was dead. The words echoed through the cobbled streets. They whispered from behind twitching lace curtains. John, the baker, known for his warm smile and even warmer bread, was gone. It seemed impossible. Yesterday, he had been seen tending his small rose garden, whistling a cheerful tune. Today, he was merely a memory, a story abruptly ended. The shock was a physical blow to the community, leaving them breathless and disoriented. Disbelief was the first visitor to every doorstep. How could this be? John was the picture of health, always robust, always ready with a jest. Rumors began to circulate, as they often do in tight-knit places. Had it been a sudden illness, an accident on the lonely country road he often walked? No one seemed to have clear answers, only questions that hung heavy in the air. The doctor, old Dr. Albright, had signed the certificate. His face, when seen, was grim, offering no comfort, only confirmation of the dreadful fact. The town flags, usually so vibrant, drooped at half-mast, mirroring the spirits of the townsfolk. Preparations for the wake began almost immediately. It was the Oakhaven way. Grief was a shared burden, a communal experience. Mrs. Higgins, who ran the local tea shop, declared she would bake John's favorite seed cake, though her hands trembled as she measured the flour. Mr. Grumbles, the notoriously taciturn postmaster, was seen quietly polishing the brass handle of the village hall door. Even the children, usually boisterous, played in muted tones, sensing the profound shift in the town's atmosphere. The world felt a little darker, a little colder without John Smith. The announcement pinned to the notice board outside the butcher's shop was stark. It stated simply the facts of John's passing and the details for the wake. People gathered before it in small, hushed groups. They read the words, then read them again, as if hoping the ink might magically rearrange itself into a less tragic message. Each villager felt a personal loss. John had a way of making everyone feel like his closest friend. He remembered birthdays, asked after ailing relatives, and always had a spare moment for a chat. His absence created a void that seemed at that moment utterly impossible to fill. The village hall was filled to capacity. Every soul from Oakhaven, and even a few from the neighbouring hamlets, had come to pay their respects. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and beeswax polish, a cloying sweetness that did little to mask the underlying sorrow. Soft murmurs rippled through the room, tales of John's kindness, his generosity, his infectious laugh. Each memory shared was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of what had been irrevocably lost. Men stood awkwardly in their Sunday best, hats clutched in their hands, while women dabbed their eyes with embroidered handkerchiefs. The silence between conversations was heavy, laden with unexpressed grief. The coffin lay at the front of the hall. It was a simple wooden box, lovingly made by Thomas, the village carpenter. He had worked through the night, his own sorrow channeled into every hammer blow. Upon it, a single wreath of wildflowers lay, picked from the meadows John himself had often roamed. Many found their gaze drawn to it, a focal point for their collective mourning. It seemed so final, so absolute. The very sight of it solidified the unbelievable truth. John Smith, their John, was truly gone from them. The flickering candlelight cast long dancing shadows, making the familiar faces of friends and neighbours seem strangely altered by the weight of the occasion. Old Mrs. Gable, John's closest neighbour, sat in the front row, her frail shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She had known John since he was a boy, mischievous and full of life. Now she was here to mourn him, a task she had never envisioned. She clutched a small, worn photograph of a younger John, his arm around her late husband. The shared history of a small town was palpable in that room. Every person present was connected to John in some way, through threads of daily interaction, shared experiences, and simple, unassuming friendship. The tapestry of their community felt torn, a vital thread pulled loose. The vicar, Reverend Alsop, prepared to speak. He shuffled his notes, his expression one of profound sadness. He had known John well, had often shared philosophical debates with him over a pint at the Ploughman's Rest. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the expectant hush. He intended to speak of comfort, of peace, of memories cherished, but before he could utter his first carefully chosen word, a sound from the back of the hall made every head turn. A sound that did not belong in this place of sorrow. A sound that would shatter the solemnity into 1,000 bewildered pieces. The heavy oak door of the village hall creaked open slowly. It was a sound that usually heralded a latecomer, perhaps someone delayed by farm duties. But this was different. A figure stood silhouetted against the fading daylight outside. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then, the figure stepped into the dim light of the hall. He was covered from head to toe in damp earth and grime. His clothes were torn, his hair matted with mud and leaves. He looked as if he had clawed his way out of the very ground itself. And then, the collective gasp. It was John Smith. Panic erupted. A woman screamed, a piercing sound that sliced through the stunned silence. Old Mr. Henderson, who prided himself on his stoic nature, clutched his chest and swayed, his face paling to a ghastly white. Several people fainted outright, slumping in their chairs or onto the polished wooden floor. Others simply stared, mouths agape, their minds struggling to reconcile the impossible sight before them. John Smith, the man they were mourning, the man lying in the coffin at the front of the hall, was standing at the back, alive. Or, at least, something that looked terrifyingly like him. The figure, this returned John, said nothing. His eyes, usually so bright and full of mirth, were vacant, clouded with an expression no one could decipher. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. His movements stiff and unnatural. He didn't seem to recognize anyone. He did not seem to understand the scene of communal grief that he had so dramatically interrupted. The mud flaked from his clothes, leaving a trail on the clean floor. The scent of damp soil now mingled with the lilies, creating a bizarre, unsettling perfume. The fear in the room was a living thing, palpable and suffocating. Reverend Alsop, recovering first, though his voice trembled, managed to speak. "John, is that truly you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with disbelief and a dawning, chilling dread. The figure did not respond. He simply continued his slow, deliberate advance towards the front of the hall, towards the coffin that bore his name. The mourners shrank back, a wave of humanity parting before him. What did this mean? Was it a ghost? A cruel trick? Or something far more sinister and inexplicable? The orderly sorrow of the wake had dissolved into pure, unadulterated chaos and terror. Constable Grimshaw, the sole representative of the law in Oakhaven, pushed his way through the terrified crowd. He was, a practical man, not given to flights of fancy, yet even he felt a cold knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He approached the returned John Smith cautiously. "All right now, sir," he said, his voice attempting a firmness it did not quite possess. "Let's just try and understand what's happening here." The man remained silent, his gaze fixed on the coffin. The constable, with a deep breath, gestured to two of the stronger men present. "Help me with this," he said, indicating the coffin lid. With trembling hands, the men prized open the coffin. A collective sigh, a mixture of horror and utter bewilderment, swept through the hall. Inside lay a man. He looked almost identical to John Smith. The same sandy hair, the same slightly crooked nose, the same build. But there were, subtle differences. A small scar above the left eyebrow that their John Smith did not possess. Fingernails that were too manicured, too clean for a man who worked with his hands. This was not John Smith, but then who was this stranger occupying John's final resting place? And where had the real John Smith been? The mystery deepened, coiling around the village like a venomous serpent. If the man in the coffin was not John Smith, then who was he? And why did he bear such an uncanny resemblance? Had there been a terrible mistake at the mortuary in the nearby city? But Dr. Albright had identified the body. Had he been mistaken? Or had he been deceived? The questions multiplied, each one more unsettling than the last. The returned John Smith offered no answers. He merely stared at the face in the coffin, his own expression unreadable, a blank canvas upon which everyone projected their own fears. The initial shock began to give way to a chilling suspicion. Where had their John been? His clothes, caked in fresh earth, suggested a recent desperate escape from somewhere underground. Had he been buried alive? The thought sent a fresh wave of horror through the assembled villagers. Or was this something else entirely, something that defied logical explanation? The local doctor, Dr. Albright, was now examining the returned John, who remained passive, unresponsive to questions, his eyes still holding that strange, distant look. The silence he maintained was more terrifying than any accusation or explanation he might have offered. Days turned into a week, and the returned John Smith remained an enigma. He was physically present in Oakhaven, yet absent in every other meaningful way. He spoke little, and when he did, his words were disjointed, confused. He showed no recognition of his old friends, his neighbours, or even his own small cottage at the end of Maple Lane. His memory, it seemed, was a complete blank, wiped clean as if by some unseen hand. He would sit for hours in his garden, not tending the roses he once loved, but simply staring into space, his gaze distant and unfocused. The cheerful baker they knew was gone, replaced by this hollow shell of a man. The body in the coffin remained unidentified. Constable Grimshaw sent fingerprints and photographs to every police district in the county, then beyond. But no match was found. The man was a ghost, a nobody, who had somehow ended up looking almost exactly like John Smith and taking his place in death. The townsfolk whispered theories in hushed tones. Was it a long-lost twin, unknown even to John, or something more sinister, a deliberate substitution, a plot too complex for their simple village minds to unravel? The lack of answers was a torment, feeding the growing unease that had settled over Oakhaven like a perpetual fog. Fear became a constant companion to the residents of Oakhaven. The children were kept closer to home. Doors were locked earlier in the evenings. The familiar, comforting rhythms of village life were disrupted by an undercurrent of dread. The returned John, with his strange silence and vacant eyes, was a constant, chilling reminder of the mystery that gripped them. Some avoided him, crossing the street when they saw him approach. Others watched him with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Was he a victim, or was he in some unknowable way connected to the dead man and the darkness that had enveloped their peaceful community? The story of the man who came back remained unfinished, a chilling chapter in Oakhaven's history. Who was the dead man in the coffin? Where had the real John Smith been during those missing hours, and what horrors had he endured to return in such a state? Why could he not remember? These questions echoed in the quiet streets, in the shadowed corners of the pub, and in the nightmares of the villagers. The unsettling presence of the silent, changed John Smith served as a daily testament to the fact that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only endured, leaving behind a legacy of fear and unanswered questions.